to our molding hands. So you see through the media, but also now through the schooling system, the priming that takes place to decouple people's ability to think critically, to be individuals, and they become part of a group mind that is melded, molded, and shaped by the power elite. I'm going to quote from now the Commissioner on Education from the United States in the 1890s. His name is William Torrey Harris. He stated, because of their system of education that was coming into play there in that decade, 99 students out of 100 are automata. That would be automatons. That would be robots. Careful to walk in the prescribed paths. Careful to follow the prescribed custom. And he says this is not an accident, but the result of substantial, and I'm going to put this in scare quotes here, education. 99 students out of 100 being automatons is the result of education, which scientifically defined, he says, is the subsumption of the individual. Now, what does that mean? To subsume the individuality of the child means they are this unique individual piece of dough, perhaps, as an example. It's got its own flavor and texture and color and scent to it. And you've got a big lump here of sameness. That is the group mind or the social mind or the public mind. The different social engineers of the 20th century all had different names for this, but you take the individual, subsume him in, and mix him through, and the unique character of that individual mind becomes lost in the group. He says the very scientific definition of education is the subsumption of the individual. 99 students out of 100. You see on the screen, and those watching online later, 3 boys standing strong and tall while everybody around them is kneeling before a golden statue. This is a Bible story from your Bible story books. Seems like about 99 out of 100 there just followed the herd mentality and went with what was trending at the time. What percentage of medical professionals question the status quo and mandates and the loss of freedom that we see today? Maybe only just that 99 out of 100 are automatons to this day, perhaps. But to paint a little even more ominous of a picture, in order to capture and prime that youth mind for the mass formation psychosis, you have to break that linkage with the family. That's where individuality and confidence and security is established, not to mention spirituality. So Elwood Cubberley is the sort of definitive historian on the development of American education, the public schooling system. And he wrote in the early 20th century, in particular, the attitude toward control of the child is likely to change. Each year, the child is coming to belong more to the state and less to the parent. The plea in defense that the child is my child will not be accepted much longer by society. Another one of these social engineers of the early 20th century was Edward Ellsworth Ross. He wrote the definitive work called Social Control. This book sort of revolutionized the fields of psychology, political science, the social sciences across the board. Social control was the main trendy thing. We're going to do this, right? And here's what he said. The goal here, when we remove and alienate children from the home into state hands, the goal is to collect little plastic lumps of human dough from private households and shape them on the social kneading board. That's from Social Control, page 168. There was a book published in the 1990s called It Takes a Village. It even advocated that children younger than 3 years old, age 2 and younger, should be brought into full-day programs. I want to quote also from Harold Rugg. He was a 1933 curriculum innovator in public schooling, and he stated in his book, The Great Technology, a new public mind is to be created. So this has been underway for over a century, hasn't it? 1933, he said, we're going to create a new public mind. How, he asks? Only by creating tens of millions of individual minds and welding them into a new social mind. Then he goes on and says, through the schools of the world, we shall disseminate a new conception of government. Now, I used to teach political science, government, U.S. history in high school, and we would always teach what is the role of government, right? We know from Romans 13 that the magistrate bears the sword to punish the wrongdoer. The government exists to protect life, liberty, and property according to the Constitution, or if you quote from the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To secure these rights, governments are instituted to protect individual freedom. He says we're going to institute a new conception of government, which if you read in prophecy, you know that's coming. You know government will extend its scope. He goes, a new conception of government will be inculcated that will embrace all the activities of men. So all of the activities of mankind will come under the purview of the state. We call this totalitarianism, one that will postulate, he calls, the need of scientific control. You might call that a technocracy or a scientific dictatorship is what Bertrand Russell called it. Bertrand Russell in the mid-20th century also said that it is to be expected that advances in physiology and psychology will give governments much more control over individual mentality. So advances in physiology, advances in psychology will give the state more control over individual mentality than they even have in totalitarian countries. That's an amazing statement. Behind the Iron Curtain, in the Eastern Bloc, you had totalitarianism reigning for the better part of half a century, right? And he says, well, we're going to have more control with enlightened social engineering and the scientific dictatorship in the West over the minds of individuals than they even have in totalitarian countries. He quotes Johann Gottlieb Fichte, who was the founder of the philosophy of modern public schooling that America adopted from Prussia. In the early 19th century, Prussia had their Industrial Revolution, and they had been humiliated by being defeated by Napoleon. And they said, never again will we be defeated in this way. We will become the greatest industrial power and military power on the European continent. And so they said, we're going to make sure that our young people are raised up as automatons. And Fichte literally said, the purpose of education is to destroy free will. That's a direct quote. But Bertrand Russell goes on and quotes Fichte. Fichte laid it down that education should aim at destroying free will, so that after pupils have left school, they shall be incapable throughout the rest of their lives of thinking or acting otherwise than as their schoolmasters would have wished. Diet, injections, and injunctions will combine from a very early age to produce the sort of character and the sort of beliefs that the authorities consider desirable, and any serious criticism of the powers that be will become psychologically impossible. That's a chilling statement, again, to know the priming for this has been laid for many decades, for the last century. I want to end with a quotation. And by the way, remember our opening Bible scripture. It says, make sure that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy. So we can break free from all the conditioning. We can break free from all the propaganda. And we can study our Bibles. And we can reclaim our individuality as being created in the image of God. That's what children are, 99 out of 100 automatons. You know, they did a study on the ability of children to think divergently, and they found that children aged 3 to 5, 98% of them naturally qualify as creative genius in the studies. You put them in school for 5 years, and that's down to only 32% qualify for creative genius. 5 more years of school of traditional methodology of Prussian-style education, which again I get to in the seminar Schooled. Just send me an email. I'll give you all that information because I know this is a lot in a short period of time. But 10% only after 10 years of Prussian-style schooling philosophy. By the age of 25, they say only 2% of the population still has that capacity that almost all of us just naturally had as 3 to 5-year-olds, because we are made as small c creators in the image of the Creator, big C. So when the Spirit of the Lord comes in, when the enemy comes in like a flood, Isaiah says, the Spirit of the Lord raises up a standard against him. And the enemy, of course, is Satan. We know that from the Bible. Our battle is not against flesh and blood. There are agencies of influence, as we've seen here, in these systems of control and power. But remember that our battle is not against them. It is against the principalities and powers of this dark world. And when the enemy comes in like a flood, the Spirit of the Lord will raise up a standard against him. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. I want to leave you with that hope. And I also want to close with a quotation from a preeminent globalist of the second half of the 20th century. He was a mentor to a previous president, Bill Clinton. His name was Carroll Quigley. He wrote in his book, Tragedy and Hope, which was really a tell-all of the agenda, the globalist sort of mindset of the 20th century. And so he, being an insider in that and a promoter of it, he predicted in his very last speech before he died, he said, what's going to be the result of all of this? He says, now I come to my last statement. Very instructive what he says. He says, the final result will be that the American people will ultimately opt out of the system. Today, everything is a bureaucratic structure, he says, and brainwashed people who are not personalities or not individuals are trained to fit into the bureaucratic structure and say it is a great life. But he says, the American people will ultimately opt out of the system. The process of opting out will take a long time. That was a long time ago when he said that, in 1978. But he says, when Rome fell, the Christian answer was create our own communities. And it was actually before Rome fell. Christians were creating their own communities right under the shadow of the Roman power and continued to do that throughout the Dark Ages. So let that be our call and invitation, that we would create our own communities with open arms to welcome all who believe in the principles of freedom. Thank you very much.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here to speak to you today. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about Roger Williams. How many of you even know who Roger Williams is? I see some hands. That's excellent. Roger Williams, his biographer, one of his biographers said that he titled his biography "The Creation of the American Soul." And he really is the founder of religious liberty, really worldwide. Thomas Jefferson credited Williams with being the original thought influencer of the First Amendment. That's amazing. What a legacy to have. Roger Williams was born in 1603. And you got to put that into context. That was, Luther did his 95 Theses in 1517. And a lot of times we think of him as being kind of the start of religious liberty. There wasn't as much liberty as you'd think under Luther and the Reformation. So Luther put forth a couple of great ideas, but one of the big ones for religious liberty was the idea of priesthood of all believers.
Okay.
But these really had not taken hold. So who was Roger Williams? Well, he was born in England.
Thank you.
He as a young man, he learned to do shorthand. And because he learned to do shorthand really good, there was an old attorney who kind of hired him to help him do shorthand. That attorney was absolutely the most influential attorney in the country. And he's actually influential on us today, although we've forgotten his name, but his name was Cook. Roger Williams, he had the opportunity to go on to be an attorney and to be extremely influential. When he was with Cook, he was meeting people like the king on a regular basis. He was meeting the leaders in the land, but he rejected that, and instead he became a pastor. He was in the Puritan church, and if you looked at what was going on in the Church of England at this time, it was really divided into three groups. You had Puritans, Separatists, and High Church. And I won't say all of them, but the High Church people were willing to kill the Puritans and the Separatists, and later on at times the Puritans are willing to kill the High Church and the Separatists. So that's what was going on for religious liberty at the time Roger Williams was born. And so he grew up, became a pastor, but then at the age 27 he had to flee England. And he fled England and he came to Massachusetts. Now, when he came to Massachusetts, he was already a little bit popular, and they offered him the main church, and he said, no, I'm not going to take it because you guys are too high church for him. And so he went out into the countryside, into a small church. There weren't very many people in Massachusetts at the time. And, you got to understand religious liberty in America. We think of people coming to America for religious liberty as this is the land of the free, right? And that's why Roger Williams came, because he's a Puritan and he's going to be persecuted in England. But was there any actual religious liberty in America at this time? No. What was going on was each of the different colonies had their own church, and you had to adhere to that church. And so Massachusetts, for instance, executed Quakers and most famously witches. So there was no religious liberty in Massachusetts. And if you look into it, man, these Puritans were really into everybody's life. And it was in that context that Roger Williams, he goes out to this outlying church, and he's preaching about separation of church and state. And the Puritans in Massachusetts couldn't tolerate that, and so in the middle of winter, they say they have a meeting in Salem, their capital, and they say, we're going to send Roger Williams back to England. And they wanted to execute him, but they were worried about what would happen because he was a little bit popular. So we'll send him back to England, where they knew he would either be executed or probably spend the rest of his life in jail. Well, Roger Williams, God sent a blizzard, and they couldn't execute they couldn't go out and arrest him for 4 days. And Roger Williams heard about that, and he runs into the wilderness. He's sick, he runs into the wilderness, and the only reason why he survives, well, is divine. I mean, they wouldn't even send a sheriff out to arrest him, the weather was so bad, and he's got to go on foot 30 miles in the wilderness. But you know what? One thing about Roger Williams is he had learned the Indian language, and the Indians were his friends, and the Indians took care of him. And so what did he do? He went to Rhode Island, and he started the colony of Rhode Island. Well, I wish I had so much more time to tell you the story, but I want to get to the punchline and why he's so important today. What did Roger Williams teach that really got him banished? Was it just simply separation of church and state, or was it can we learn more than that? This is what he spoke against that got him banished. He said the government should not compel church attendance, because it did at the time. He said that loyalty oaths made a blasphemer out of an atheist, because you used to have to take these oaths that said, hey, so help me God. But he knew atheists were taking the oath and they were becoming blasphemers because they didn't believe in God. He also said that the king shouldn't give away Indian lands, that people should buy Indian lands. That's what got him kicked out. That's at the beginning of when he really gets to preach. All of this developed into something much more developed as he went on. What did he do? He goes to Rhode Island. He buys the land from the Indians, and he tells everybody, you can come to Rhode Island and I'll give you religious freedom. Well, Massachusetts can't tolerate that, so Massachusetts sends a guy over there who's a swindler to pretend he gets this false deed to the land that he bought from the Indians, and he says, hey, I own Rhode Island, and then Massachusetts raises troops to go attack Rhode Island so they can give the land to him. It's a mess. And so Roger Williams goes back to England. He goes back to England. He says, I've got to have a charter, because he had just started this by just buying the land from the Indians. He didn't have the royal charter. And he goes back to royal charter, and he gets the royal charter, but not before Massachusetts got a fraudulent moral charter. So this is the persecution that Roger Williams is under. But when he's going through all this persecution, he's developing his theology. And if you look at historians today, they argue whether Roger Williams was a theologian or a political scientist, because they can't tell. He's that important. You can't tell the difference. So what did he say? Well, he taught that the government received its power and authority from the citizens. It's the opposite of divine right rulers. And the divine right rulers with a king, it goes from God, perhaps to Pope, to king. That's the power. And then from king to the lesser nobles to the people. Roger Williams says, no. We're all made in the image of God, and it comes from the people, and we give our power, we consent. John Locke just completely plagiarized him, and that became the philosophy of American government. He taught separation of church and state, and he taught something called the Doctrine of Two Tables, and this is really important. I'm going to talk about this more in my second presentation. What is the Doctrine of Two Tables? Roger Williams looked at the 10 Commandments, and he said, look, it's written on 2 tables of stone. And the first 4 commandments are man's duty to God, and the last 6 commandments are man's duty to man. And this is what he said, and this is key. Government has absolutely no right whatsoever to legislate in the first table, the first 4 commandments. Government should never be there, ever. But he said government has a duty to legislate in the last 6. You know, when I look around what's going on today, we're not legislating very good in the last 6 anymore. And now we're starting to see a temptation to legislate in the first 4. So that's the legacy of Roger Williams. How do we apply it today? I'm going to talk later. I'm just my advertisement for coming to my second talk, but you're going to be going around to the other things. So I'm going to impose onto that talk. What does this have to do with vaccines? How can I sow that in the two tables? Well, if you look carefully, Christ was asked this question: what is the greatest commandment? And Christ said to love the Lord your God with all your heart. But the second one is just almost like it. And that is to love your fellow man as yourself. And so he's kind of got these two tables going on. You know, you got the first 4, love God, and the second is to love man. But that's still, we got to answer the question, is the vaccine mandate religious or not? Does that go into the first 4? Christ was asked another question. A man came up to him, probably a lawyer, and said, hey, do I have to pay taxes? And Christ said, hey, show me a coin. And they pull out the coin, and what he says, Christ says, whose picture is on that coin? Caesar's picture is on that coin. And then Christ says, give to Caesar that which is Caesar, and give to God that which is God's. Whose image are you made in? Whose image do you reflect? God. And that answers the question as to our body, which table? It's the first table, and we owe that duty to God. And the state has no right to legislate in this table. Sadly, my time is up. But remember Roger Williams. Remember what he taught. And remember Thomas Jefferson. We all know Thomas Jefferson. And what does he say? No Roger Williams, no First Amendment. I'm telling you, the First Amendment is the heart of our Constitution. It's the most important amendment. It's the amendment for us. And when you exert your First Amendment rights, you're walking in the footsteps of Thomas Jefferson, who walks in the footsteps of Roger Williams, who is walking in the footsteps of Christ. Thank you.
I'm so glad that you guys are here to listen to these powerful presentations. But we know that mental health also matters. With mental health, anxiety and fear is at a rise. For 21 years now, I've been collecting information on how people's behavior and emotions follow tragedy or trauma itself, and the ways that we see that they can actually overcome based on how they're thinking and their habits that follow. So I'll find news articles like this, where it says that there is a woman who was duct taped to the plane seat after attempting to open the plane door during what appears to be a mental health breakdown that she had. Do you see her reaction? And then also, there's articles that talks about various things like trauma, a collective trauma they call it. One recent news article that was published by the Washington Post summarized it very well. The title was Coronavirus, a New National Crisis. 2 years into the pandemic, with no end in sight, Americans face the effect of collective trauma. That was the title. And they cited stories upon stories about individuals fighting or breaking jars over what seemingly indifference, or even argument where police are involved. But they also cited experiences of individuals that are afraid that are depressed. So we see anxiety, depression, fear, hostility, fighting, violence, cruelty, force, and also hatred. You know, Luke 21 verse 26 cited that men's heart failing them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming upon the earth. For the powers of heaven shaken by, or shall be shaken. The thing that we have to remember, that when we have fear that's compounded by anger, it creates a hostility or hostile environment. With the coronavirus, there's even research that's showing prior to the pandemic, in 2019 rather, 11% of Americans indicated they had symptoms of depression or even anxiety. By December of 2020, that number went up to 42% of all Americans. Just as the Bible cited, when you see that fear and even torment are going up high, love, sound mind, and trust goes down. Things to remember, that there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out all fear, because love has torment. He that fear is not made perfect in love. Even after the vaccination was mandated, or even being monitored, I should say, there were scientists or even research looking at if the fear and worries of individuals would go down. You would guess it. The fear and anxiety continues to rise. The three highest category of individuals who are citing worries or stress are individuals between the ages of 18 and 29, mothers, women. Those are the highest three categories. Not to mention all other ones are also high. In addition to that too, the question was asked, do you think that now that the feelings would be better, that worries are now worst for things to come, or the worst is yet behind us? Let me say that one time. Do you think that the worst is yet behind us, or the worst is yet to come? The worst is said to be yet to come by 60% of the population. Let's define what mental health is. According to the American Psychological Association, it is said that mental illness are health conditions that involve changes in emotion, thinking, and behavior, or combination of all those things. So if you know that thinking and emotions and behaviors are character, we can say that mental illness are health conditions that involve changes in one's character. What exactly are we looking at? Things like depression and anxiety are stated to have symptoms of anger, hostility, or can have feelings of guilt, distress, self-loathing. That's a mild form of anxiety and depression. If these things are not addressed, it can become moderate, where we have symptoms of worthlessness, feeling of worthlessness, even spiritual disconnection, or reduction in productivity, feeling of worthlessness, or even panic attack or excessive worries. If these things are not addressed, it can get to the point where the individual have what's called severe depression or severe form of anxiety. These, compounded by everything that we discussed, can state that the individual will also feel lethargic, or even have suicidal thoughts or delusional situations as well. Sadly, what we're seeing as well, the World Health Organization has stated that over 800,000 people commit suicide every single year. We have to do better. We have to address these things, because our young ones are the ones that's stating that the second leading cause of death amongst the ages of 15 and 29 are stating to be suicide. And then not to mention that for each individual that actually commits suicide, 20 more have attempted. Thank God they were not successful. So what is trauma? According to, again, the American Psychological Association, trauma are emotional response that's due to tragic events like accidents, abuse, even rape or neglect, or even national disasters, or even sickness as well. can cause these things. The reactions can be flashback or even restrained relationships or physical symptoms that impact their health. There's a list there, but you guys cannot see it. But if I ask how many people have experienced trauma, many hands would go up. Things like war or abuse or loss or anxiety, divorce, fear. But what we need to understand, that trauma itself is based on the experience that we have is based on our response to how our thoughts, our words, our actions, or the habit that we allow to follow. If we allow these things to be negative, then it can lead itself for us to experience many different character changes within us, things like even having strife or competition or even jealousy or hatred in our heart. These things can come into us unconsciously in changing our characters. But we're also seeing that in research, the connection between our minds and our bodies are so connected that when we allow these spirits to come in to have us to be so jealous or fearful or enraged with others, it actually impacts our bodies as well, where we are damaging our minds and our bodies do follow. But also, these same events, the traumas, if we have the right mindset where our thoughts, our words, our actions, our habits are positive irregardless, then it can invite different sort of spirits or even the character in us to be loving, joy, peace, long-suffering. Does that sound familiar? Goodness and faith can reign within us where it can actually promote courage and hope and faith and sympathy where our health do follow of having even longer life. Health, when we are having the right mindset of gratitude, compassion, and love, it grows to where we are improving the health that we're given. One thing to remember from this talk is that it's not about the trauma itself that one experienced, but it's about the thoughts that we allow to come in. It's about the words that we allow to come out of our mouths. It's about the actions that do follow. It's about the habits that we create that will dictate if one will have anxiety, depression, or any of these mental health disorders. Thank you.
Sorry, I was giving her time. All right, well, welcome. It's a pleasure to be here with you. My name is Dr. Mark Sandoval, and we are going to be talking about some natural remedies that you can use in your home in treating things like COVID or other things of that nature. And we're going to be looking generally at hydrotherapy at this time. Some basic principles of hydrotherapy. Hydro, water, therapy, treatment, so water treatments. It applies water to the body in order to modify and assist the body's own functions. And typically it does this by changing temperature with hot or cold applications and therefore manipulating nerve function, circulatory system, and so on. And the science on heat applications, the research shows us it increases monocytes, tumor necrosis factor alpha, increases response to bacterial challenges. It cuts colds almost in half. With frequent saunas, it decreases pneumonia occurrence by about a half as well, decreases viral replication, and can even increase cell death of cancers through various different mechanisms. Also, cold has research as well that shows that increases in that cold exposure for brief periods of time can increase your total white blood cell count, the granulocytes, which are a type of white blood cells that particularly are responsive to bacteria, and natural killer cells and their activity, and increases interleukin-6 production, which is involved in the immune response. And then contrast, going back and forth between hot and cold, it can increase, again, your white blood cells. Lymphocytes, neutrophils, and basophils are types of those white blood cells that have particularly been seen. And a simple thing, one of the most simple things you can do is simply end your shower with cold. All right, research is showing just in your shower with cold, 30 seconds of cold at the end of the shower can decrease days lost to sickness by 29%. Now, we're going to be looking at one particular treatment that we have found to be particularly beneficial in this whole pandemic and helping get people through it, and it is called a general revulsive, and we're going to be demonstrating that here in just a minute. You want to come up? And anyways, this can be used for any respiratory infections. It can be used for chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, for lung cancer. I know individuals that have used it for that as well, and for other lung problems also. And so we're going to run through that here. We have our faithful assistant who is going to help out and getting on the table and laying down in the position. Now this table is going to represent a bed. So we're going to imagine that you're on a bed. And we have a number of things here, including a pillow, and we have a basin. And in this basin, this is all a dry run, but imagine what's happening in real life. You've got hot water, and you're going to pour the hot water in the basin by your hand so that it doesn't get on their feet, and making sure that it's not too hot. We're going to use this as a hot foot bath. Now, if you have somebody that has diabetes, peripheral vascular disease, blood clotting in the legs or other things like that, you might want to forego this or make sure the temperature is less than 103 degrees Fahrenheit. But otherwise, it's basically as hot as they can tolerate it, but don't pour the hot water on their feet. And so you have the hot that's going on there, the pillow to help support, and the bed has a shower curtain underneath the sheet so that you can keep the bed from getting wet from the treatment, because you are going to be using water, and there's a trash bag over the pillow to keep it from getting wet as well. And so we want to make sure that our patient is, or our friend or family is nice and warm during this treatment. Now I'm going to have you sit up just slightly. You can see underneath there's this white. There's going to be a heating pad or something hot under their back, under the back of the chest, so that it can heat up the back side of the chest. And then what we're going to use for the main part of the treatment is something simple, and I think all of you probably have this at home. It's a towel, right? And something really expensive, a Walmart bag. So what you do is you get the towel, you get it nice and moist, and then you wring it out, and then you're going to fold it up to approximately the size of the chest that you want to cover. You're going to get that, put it into this fancy schmancy bag, and most of you have a microwave at home, so what you're going to do is you're just going to put that bag with the moist towel, and you're going to throw it in the microwave. Here's my microwave. And you're going to leave it there on high for about 4 to 5 minutes. So after it's there, grab it by the tabs, because it's going to be really hot, and grab it by the tabs, bring it out, and then not on the patient, but since I don't have another table, I'm going to do it on him. You pull it out like that, and now you have another towel. And what you're going to do is you're going to wrap this first hot one, and I don't want to burn my fingers, but you know, we're on a demonstration right now. And so you get the dry towel, and you wrap it around the hot one a few times, so that you've got about 2 to 3 layers of dry towel between the hot, very hot, moist towel. And then on his bare chest, which we're not demonstrating right now, you're going to lay it directly on the skin, asking him if it's too hot or not, and checking frequently, every few minutes or so. Put your hand underneath just to make sure that it's not too hot. Ask him frequently whether that's the case. And then this, we'll imagine, has ice water, water with ice in it, and a nice hand towel. So we're going to get that all nice and moist, and then we're going to use it in order to keep his head nice and cool. And periodically, we're going to give him the option of taking some water so that he can remain hydrated while he's in the process of this treatment. Now, after 3 to 5 minutes of having the heat on the chest, you remove the hot towel, and you take your ice water and your ice towel, and you're going to rub the chest for about 30 seconds with the ice water. And so it's going to be nice and cold. It'll be very vigorous. in the process. And so about 30 seconds of cold. The cold goes back, hot comes back on. Now it might not be so hot, so let's go down to 2 layers. Right? So it's still retaining its heat and warmth on the body. And then we're going to do another 3 to 5 minutes this way. And then we'll come off. And we're going to go back to the cold and rubbing cold on the chest. And so you're going to end up with about 5 to 7 exchanges of hot, 3 to 5 minutes, cold, 30 seconds, hot, 3 to 5 minutes, cold, 30 seconds, back and forth like that. And then when the treatment is done, then what you're going to want to do is take some ice water and lift their feet out of the tub and pour the ice water over their feet. Right? And then you would grab the towel that's over there, okay, and dry his feet. Right? And then we're going to let him get up. And we're going to, in this case, not have him sleep on this, but you could leave him right there in the bed and let him rest for about an hour or so after the treatment is done. Thank you very much. All right. So that's called a general revulsive. It's a general way that we can use. It's actually been, we have found it to be one of the most effective treatments, especially since Delta came around. And when we've been dealing with patients, especially with Delta, even with some fairly good complications, we found this to be one of the better treatments for that. It does take some time, it does take some effort, but it's something that you can do at home when there are generally no recommendations for what to do at home. And it's something that you can use, it's cheap, and it uses things that you have in your own home already. And so that's something that can be beneficial for you. And for those of you that can see the slides, there's some references there for research relative to this. And we do have quite a bit of experience with it in showing that it does work. And thank you for this time. I think there might be a transition that happens now for those that are interested in going to another different segment. Now, if you want more information, you can go to both npmin.org, that's N as in Nancy, P as in Peter, M-I-N, and .org, or UC Pines, that's UCHEEPINES.org. There's a whole COVID-19 section there, so that's UCHEE, UCHEEPINES.org. There's a whole COVID-19 section with the whole protocol, videos, and that kind of stuff with these things for your benefit. Thank you very much. Dana?
Took my microphone away. We're going to take a 5-minute break. You have the opportunity, freedom of liberty, to be able to go to another venue if you would like to at this time, and we'll be back in 5 minutes, and we have our second group to speak. Thanks for being here today, and I hope you can come back. It's Right, we're back. So some of the questions I'm getting, is it going to be the same presentations? No, it is not. You're going to hear Dave Fiedler's going to come up. Haven't heard him yet. Dr. Pam Solger is going to speak. Then Scott Ritzma speaking on a different platform, and you're going to hear Mark Sandoval speak on something different as well. The third hour, we're going to hear Jonathan Zirkel speaking again about the legal aspect, the second part of his. Dr. Pam Solger will speak about something different as well, and Dana will speak about something else, and Mark as well. Let me tell you something. These are all being recorded, and we're human beings. We only can be one place at a time. So once they're recorded and on our website, you can go home and watch them in the comfort of your living room and be free to go wherever you want today. But I hope you enjoy these presentations that are next.
Good afternoon. In the spirit of the occasion, I want to give you freedom. So I'm going to be talking about another approach, and you cannot see the slides. I guess you can if you tune into the live stream or something like that, they were saying, but probably easier to see those later. But I want to give you another approach for dealing with the current situation in case you are not actually a virologist. So let me start off by getting a few little preliminaries out of the way. By way of full disclosure, I have 3 points to mention, each of which will have some significance in the course of my presentation. I am not a virologist. I'm not actually even a scientist per se. I am a historian with a particular focus on Christian world influence. So I'm not a scientist, but I'm a historian. And within that context of Christian world influence, I happen to be a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Now, occasionally when I have expressed my analysis of COVID-related issues, kind souls who have been trying to keep me balanced have reminded me, Dave, you're not a virologist. And that's absolutely true. Let me begin with 40 words selected from the biblical book of Luke. Jesus here is actually quoting from the writings of the prophet Isaiah. This was written 600 odd years before. But Jesus is taking this passage and saying, this is a description of my life work. He quotes, "The Lord has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed." Now I want you to notice some particular elements of those 40 words. There is an emphasis on the poor, treating the poor, healing, that's be health care, the brokenhearted. There is a repeated emphasis twice on liberty, setting liberty or proclaim liberty to the captives, and set at liberty those who are oppressed. Obviously, this is a verse for today. We're talking about liberty. And I cannot imagine that the liberty spoken of here would not take into consideration the plight of millions of people currently held captive by misguided and ineffectual medical mandates. So my first takeaway, I have 3 short takeaways for you today. The first one is the value of human liberty is inherent, God-given, and non-disposable. Liberty is a priceless possession. This attitude of liberty, it seems to me, is something that makes human society workable. It's worth noting that above all other forms and aspects of liberty, perhaps the most basic is the freedom and the ability to think for oneself. This is fundamental. You really have no liberty of any nature if you are not free to think for yourself. And that brings me back to the point that I am not a virologist. I'm more than willing to admit that there are technical aspects of the whole COVID scenario and pandemic and everything that I am neither trained nor sufficiently skilled to fully understand. Perhaps that's true for some of you as well. That's not a surprise. I am not primarily a hard science kind of a guy. I'm more of a humanities kind of a guy. But after spending decades dealing with history and all the various manifestations of human nature that come up with that topic, while I'm willing to admit that I may not understand virology, I am not willing to admit that I am incapable of recognizing propaganda, distortions, misinformation, outright lies, and societal manipulation. That's my field, human interaction. And when I see that in the midst of a medical scenario, I feel entirely justified in making and forming some opinions of my own. I may be one of the people that you can fool some of the time, but I am not one you can fool all the time. Perhaps that's true of you as well. And it's important for me to note that I do not have to be a virologist to come to that conclusion. Neither do you. You have the freedom to think for yourself. Please do not lose that freedom and do not neglect it. I also want to point out the connection in this passage that I just quoted between liberty and a concern for the poor. Just keep that thought in mind. Never before in human history have so many been so completely reduced to poverty and brokenheartedness through a captivity and an oppression that they themselves do not fully understand. It's just the way it is. Simply put, the truth needs to be heard around the world. Millions have been blinded, at least metaphorically, and it's up to us to help them recover their sight. You have an opportunity, and I would say an obligation, to tell the truth. Let it be known what you have known, what you have learned. I can give you all sorts of recommendations as to how to do that and how not to do that. There are ineffective ways to tell the truth, and there are more effective ways. Try to use the effective ones, and oftentimes that includes taking into consideration a little bit of politeness. It's also important to understand that on one level, this whole scenario is actually a war of influence. Against what I consider to be the truth stand the mysteriously unified conventional voices of the world. Think about that for a moment. When was the last time you saw every country of the world sign up for the same self-destructive economic course? There's something really strange about that. Our job is to gain and to exercise more influence than those unified voices of the rest of the world. You may think that sounds pretty stupid, actually. You may think it's impossible. But let me illustrate how that can be done. That sort of thing has been done in the past. Since I am a historian, I'm going to quote from Criterion, which is a respected, peer-reviewed journal of classical historical studies. The authors of this article note that in the early centuries of the Christian era, and now I'm quoting from the article, the new Christian ethic of almsgiving, piety, and caring for the old, poor, and infirm soon gained a prominence for the church which was out of proportion to the number of Christians in the Roman world. Visiting the sick, the elderly, and the poor was a duty incumbent on all Christians. As Christians, that was expected. That's what they did. Going on with the article. The modern hospital concept itself had its origin in the early Christian communities, and their compassion and long-term care for suffering was fundamentally different from anything known before. I find that fascinating. Did you know that that's where hospitals came from? Prior to the Christian era, there was no such thing as a hospital. There was at most perhaps a single isolated renowned healer. But the whole concept of a unified, organized care for the poor and the sick came out of these Christian communities. They go on to say, neither the pagan temples nor the mystery religions created a caring community like that of early Christianity. In time, even the Roman emperors who had persecuted them commented favorably on the Christians' unstinting assistance to all victims of the epidemics which ravaged the Roman Empire during the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th centuries. Christian health ministration was also continued in spite of patients' poor prognosis for cure. That means the guy's likely to die. And they cared for him anyhow. The health administration was continued in spite of that poor prognosis, situations in which patients would probably have been abandoned by Hippocratic medicine of the day. The early Christians gained the influence to change the world, despite the unified voices of the whole world against them. That final note in the author's comment there that I quoted, the selection, of unreserved commitment, caring for that person as long as life should last, echoes the commitment of the soldier who stays true to his vow to leave no man behind. And so this is my takeaway number 2. The value of human life is inherent, God-given, and non-disposable. And in respecting that, we gain influence. That being the case, it makes sense to preserve both life and the quality of life. Now, I speak of this from a somewhat privileged position. I am a member of perhaps the most intensively studied population on Earth, and the reason for that is simple. Despite being the most genetically and ethnically diverse denomination in the United States, Adventist men on average live nearly 9 extra years. Ladies, I'm sorry, it's only 4.5 extra years for you, but you had a head start in the general population, so don't feel too bad. It is, well, let's put it this way. I feel that all human life is God-given and non-disposable, and it would be a dereliction of duty for me not to mention to you at least the possibility of looking into some of the details of the lifestyle that works well for us. An extra 9 years seems like a good deal to me. And that brings me to my takeaway number 3. The famous anthropologist, Margaret Mead, is said to have once asked an audience, what was the first sign, the first historical sign of civilization? She offered a few possible responses to that. She said maybe a clay pot, perhaps, or tools made from iron, or maybe the first domesticated plants. She said these are all early signs, but here is what I believe to be the earliest evidence of true civilization. And with saying that, she held over her head a femur, a human femur, the largest bone in the leg. It was, she pointed out on the leg itself, on the bone itself, a grossly enlarged area. Well, anyone with a little medical understanding would know immediately that that femur had been broken and then re-healed. The healing enlarges the bone. And she said, this is the first sign of civilization for me. Such signs of healing, she said, are never found among the remains of the earliest, fiercest societies. In their skeletons, we find clues of violence. A rib pierced by an arrow, a skull crushed by a club. But this healed bone shows that someone must have cared for that injured person. Hunted on his behalf, brought him food, served him at personal sacrifice. Human isolation is inherently uncivilized. Someone had to care for that person with the broken leg. Its effect, isolation, the effect of isolation is to make us self-centered, to focus on our own frustrations and fears, and to forget the guy with the broken leg. This has been a disaster for thousands of people around the world who have been denied the care and companionship of those who love them, often dying alone in a hospital setting, stripped of the very compassion and humanity which first attracted those who served there. Or have I missed something? Have you seen an increase in civilization in the last 2 years? Are people more willing to engage in respectful discussion of disputed points? Is it the spirit of self-sacrifice and care for others' good that causes the protests that show up repeatedly on the evening news? Perhaps the Bible said it best. It is more blessed to give than to receive. And this should begin to sound familiar, because those items, my 3 takeaways, may have a familiar ring to them. Reviewing quickly, the value of human liberty is inherent, God-given, and not disposable. The value of human life is inherent, God-given, and not disposable. And the liberty to assemble freely lies at the root of both our civilization and our happiness. This is not to be surprised at. This is nothing that should catch you by surprise, because it should be sounding familiar. 245 years ago, a number of men far smarter than I got together, and at the risk of their lives, they signed a document which proclaimed, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Happiness comes through the blessing of others. This is the fruit of liberty." And I did a lot of research on this one last point. Those men who signed that document, not one of them was a virologist.
Good afternoon. I'm here to talk to you today about a really important topic, the biology of fear. And I want to start off by defining fear. And I think most of us probably know the feeling of fear really well. And I feel like to some extent we are in a pandemic of fear. And fear is defined as an unpleasant emotion that is caused by the belief, and I think that's really important to understand, and I want you to remember that as we go through this talk today, that someone or something is either a threat or a danger to ourselves. And it's really important to understand the biology of fear and understand how it affects not just our behavior, but it also affects our thinking, and most importantly, it affects our reasoning ability. You know, our body's fear response starts in a part of the brain called the amygdala. It's a small part of the brain, and once the amygdala experiences something that could be dangerous to us as an individual, it sends a message to the prefrontal cortex, which is the frontal part of the brain. So let me give you an example. If you are walking down the street and you hear a loud bang, your amygdala will immediately send a signal to the prefrontal cortex, and it will tell it, you need to determine if this is a danger or a threat to me as an individual. And if it determines that, let's say it was just a car backfiring, it will send a message back to the amygdala to tell it to calm down and everything's okay. But what if it isn't a car? What if it's a gun? And that loud bang could maybe cause a threat. Then our body goes through a variety of physiological responses. Things like our pupils dilate so that we can take more information in. Our heart rate increases, our blood pressure goes up, our breathing becomes more rapid as a way to help us deal with this dangerous threat that's in front of us. And when we experience this physiological response, there's one of three things that happen to us as individuals. This is something you're all familiar with. We either fight, we flight, or there's an additional one I want to talk about today. It's called freeze. So the first one, fight. One of the interesting things about the biology of fear that I believe God put into our bodies is it's an interesting physiological response that happens. If we are supposed to fight, which is facing the danger that's in front of us, our bodies naturally respond by all the blood leaves our stomach and some of our vital organs and actually goes to our hands and our arms. And we know that that's what we're supposed to do. The other one is flight. When I'm presented with a dangerous situation and I'm supposed to flee or leave this, my legs get all the blood. All the blood rushes to my legs and my feet. And so the interesting thing is there's a third one, which is freeze. Now, this really applies more to the animal kingdom because often you'll see animals in the animal kingdom, if they're confronted by a predator, that animal will freeze, hoping that the predator doesn't see it. The difference is God gave us as human beings something that animals don't have, and that is the ability to reason. It's the ability to reason. The problem is our prefrontal cortex, which is found right here, it's the seat of our emotion, where all my emotions take place, but it's also the seat of my critical thought, good reasoning, and judgment. So I don't know about you, but when I'm in an emotional state, maybe I'm driving down the road and somebody cuts me off, my emotions sometimes get the better of me, and I don't use my critical thought, good judgment, and reasoning skills, and sometimes I react on those emotions. Today, we are in a pandemic of fear. We are constantly bombarded by information, some relevant, some not relevant, some truthful, some not truthful. We're in an information war. And we need, when we're in a state of fear, remember, our emotions can be compromised and our good judgment kind of goes out the door. You know, a majority of the people, it's human nature, they often form their beliefs by trusting an authority. They form their beliefs by trusting an authority, not by their own evaluation or maybe working things out for themselves. Like they might say, oh, the CDC said it, or the news station said it, or even my pastor said it, so that settles it, that's good enough for me. But we need to remember to take back control of our emotions and use our reasoning skills that God gave us. You know, Dr. Timothy Jennings, he's a Christian psychiatrist. He's the president of Come and Reason Ministries. He describes three types of thinkers, and I want to end with this. The first is a passive thinker. This is a person who gives up their thinking to an authority figure. There's also another type of thinker who tends to tune out. They don't want to be bothered by information. So they just ignore any information coming in, whether it's truthful or not. And then there's the third, which is the critical thinker, the person who wants to use solving problems for themselves by getting the information that they need and using their reasoning skills. When we are not sure what the truth is, and this is kind of the answer to this information war that we're bombarded by. When we don't know what the truth is, who to believe, do we look this direction or this direction? I think it's really important that we evaluate the methods that are being used. You know, I think of Dr. McCullough. You know, we've all had the opportunity to hear him speak. when I hear him speak, I don't see him trying to force other doctors or coerce other doctors to use early treatment. He presents the truth and leaves people free to decide for themselves. You know, on the opposite side of this, we see a whole lot of coercion, a whole lot of misinformation, falsehoods, silencing of other narratives. And we need to remember that when we're in fear and our emotions are hijacked, we need to take that back. We need to give it to God, and we need to remember the importance of using our reasoning skills. Just to end, I want to remind you of a really important biblical principle. You know, the Bible tells us that we need to be persuaded in our own mind through the guidance of the Holy Spirit, with the help of God, and through prayer. The choice is yours. Thank you.
This presentation is entitled America's 11th Hour, Our Historical Crossroads. And I'm going to begin with an image on the screen. Those present here don't see it on the screen, but on the left is a card with a single line. On the right is 3 different lines, each of different lengths, one of those lengths matching the card on the right. It's the kind of question you would show a 2-year-old, and 100% of human beings would get the answer 100% right 100% of the time. Which one does it match in length, A, B, or C? Very easy question. Now let's say you're brought into an experiment with 7 other people. The 7 people in front of you in line answer correctly, of course, the answer to that card. It comes to you as person number 8 after everybody in front of you has answered correctly, and you answer correctly as well. But what you're not aware of is the 7 people in front of you in this experiment that was done in the 1950s called the Solomon Asch experiment. Those 7 people are prepared to answer incorrectly on a number of these little quiz questions. And the same answer in a row, and then it gets down to person number 8, and you're going, well, I know it's A, and they're all saying it's B. It's a little bit of a dilemma, isn't it? Well, you think that you would answer correctly, even in defiance of the group being wrong, but the person in the 8th seat doesn't realize these are all actors and that they're doing a trick to see how you will respond. Shockingly, Professor Asch found that 75% of person number 8s who would sit and listen to everybody in front of them answer wrong, 75% of them would answer wrong incorrectly with the group. Because, well, various reasons. I didn't want to stand out, it's awkward. Or, well, they all say it's A, it must be A. So your mind starts to change and alter. Some of them in subsequent interviews even said, well, I thought it was A. Literally, their eyes were playing tricks on them. It shows the power of group conformity to literally decouple our rational capacity. Another experiment was done, more famous one, called the Milgram Experiment. A test subject is brought and set in a chair with knobs and a button for electrically shocking somebody on the other side of the wall. And why would they electrically shock them? Well, it's a new innovative way to teach them to get answers correctly, and we're going to give them a bunch of quiz questions, and oh, he just got one wrong. Shock the man on the other side of the wall. Nobody's being shocked, but they have recordings of people played. I want to end the experiment. People begging to be increase the electrical current. We need to administer another shock, says the experimenter in a white lab coat. The power of authority to decouple the conscience of the subject of the person, to not resist that authority and say, I cannot do this. They kept increasing the knob, 100% of them, to a voltage of 300 volts. 100% of those test subjects, 65% of the test subjects would go all the way to the red line where the knob was labeled potentially lethal. People were banging on the wall on the other side of the room pretending, get me out of here. It's the power of authority and the power of conformity to decouple our reason and our conscience from our human nature and our individuality. After September 11, 2001, an American talk radio host staged a hoax on his listening audience. In this jaw-dropping hour of radio, he said, we must begin to identify the threat in our midst, all people of the Islamic faith. He was testing the reaction of his listeners to see how they would respond to the absurdly discriminatory suggestions, such as all Muslims in America need to wear a distinctive armband or receive a crescent-shaped moon tattoo identifying them everywhere they go. Then he opened the phones to the callers. The callers called in. A few of them said, "You're off your rocker, that's crazy," but a surprisingly high number of people agreed and piled on and said even more, "No, we got to go even further. Internment camps for all Muslims." It wasn't just a few fringe callers either. The Gallup poll organization in 2006 found 39% of people at that time believed that all Muslims, American citizens even, should be required to bear a unique Islamic identification publicly. That horrific poll made international news, and it was a wake-up call to students of history that latent fear and bigotry that we had hoped was a thing of the past is ever waiting the right context and opportunity to spring to life again and bring death. If we aren't vigilant, it's not a matter of could it happen again. It's a matter of when, not if. Now, most of us have been privileged to learn the facts of history, to embrace the universally applicable humanitarian values, and so we recoil at the thought of again characterizing and demonizing a group as the other. Whether it was the witch hunts or the witch trials of centuries past, or the Jews scapegoated for the social ills of Germany, or the Japanese internment camps in our own country and during World War II, or the famed and notorious Jim Crow laws, we can all say in unison, never again to allowing intolerance of the despised and rejected. And we assume, well, it never could happen. That's something of history. We could never repeat that again. But you'd see on the slide all the pop stars, and the immorality is today's society so morally superior to our forebears that we are immune from the disease of intolerance, because right before our very eyes right now, a two-class citizen is being constructed with a new underclass. We've already categorized by race, we've categorized by religion. What about this time? Categorized by vaccination status. And the same pattern is followed each time. It begins with a demonization campaign. That other is slandered as possessing a lower quality of moral or intellectual worth. Oh, they are selfish, they are anti-science, and they're labeled as a danger to society. That's where the scapegoating takes place. It's a pandemic of them, a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Then comes the segregation. The other is relegated to separate seating areas, even denied admittance to public accommodations. We've been down this road before, haven't we? After that, further human rights are curtailed. In our present case, the other is denied employment opportunities, in-person academic instruction, even medical care in certain cases, asked to cover your face wherever you go. And of course, free speech is being curtailed by the powerful like never before. Well, what comes next after those steps? My friends, freedom is rare. It's a scarce commodity throughout history. Genocide and tyranny, that's a dime a dozen. That's the norm. That's the thing to be expected, because particularly students of the Bible understand the depth and darkness of human depravity. And so if we diminish the potential and the danger of human depravity, we do so at the peril of the lives and freedoms of millions. The racial eugenics component should not be missed. Superior versus inferior races, weeding out the weak, breeding for a better humanity. Early 20th century ideology. Before it was a Nazi ideology, it was birthed in America actually in the progressive era, so-called. It was borrowing from Darwin, survival of the fittest, weeding out the weak, breeding for the strong. And so human beings were then stratified into the better and the lesser, which not only demeaned the value of the individual, of course, but in several cases this led to forced medical procedures, forced sterilization of the underclass, of blacks, of the imbeciles. Yes, this invasive medical procedure became public health policy in America. One could, of course, justifiably call that a bunch of bigots and tyrants and power-hungry social engineers. But one thing is clear, it was not a backwoods, toothless, ne'er-do-well sort of scenario. These are the highest intelligentsia. The clergy of mainline Christian denominations promoted eugenics. The political class, the most respected and professional. It was not a hidden conspiracy or a dark underbelly. It was something even the Supreme Court took up and affirmed of in the famous Buck v. Bell decision of 1927, where they said you do have a right to have the state forcibly sterilize people. It was part of 3 Supreme Court cases that have been called the Trilogy of Infamy. Buck v. Bell was the second. You know what was the first? Forced vaccination, Jacobson v. Massachusetts, 1904, followed by 1944, Korematsu upholding Japanese internment. This is reckless deference to those in power, combined with an equally reckless disregard for the rights of the weaker members of society. It led to a historical context where during the eugenics era, these landmark cases, the individual was lost in the collective. Personal freedom was sacrificed on the altar of the common good, which is defined, of course, by the powerful. I don't think any of us want to return to that dark era of eugenics. Trust the science is a phrase we hear today, but that sounds to a lot, particularly in the African American community, who are aware of the diabolical Tuskegee syphilis experiments. Trust the science sounds an awful lot like, well, that's trust the scientists, who happen to have positions of power and conflicts of interest as well, and silence the dissenting scientists. The majority of the black community aren't buying it at this point. They, along with PhDs, are the highest resistant groups to the vaccination agenda. But the past wasn't all bleak and dark. History records inspiring reformatory movements, from the abolitionist movement to women's suffrage, to the civil rights era, to progressive era labor reforms, and of course my favorite, the Protestant Reformation, that have helped to actualize the self-evident truth that all men are created equal, all men and women, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And if men and women of conscience will do as the psalmist said in Psalm 82, verse 3, defend the weak and the fatherless, and uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed, then, although history's dark chapters threaten to revive, we may be, for a time, prisoners of hope. So the question remains for all of us, within our sphere of influence, will we have the courage to learn from history and speak and act for the cause of justice? We ask, is liberty in her 11th hour at the moment? Well, we are at a historical crossroads right now. History gives us the lessons we need to do right at this critical juncture. Thank you.
All right, back to some natural remedies. Testing, there we go. Back to some natural remedies. We are going to be looking specifically at onions. Powerful onions. All right, you got them everywhere. And so we're going to be looking at onion poultice. We'll also talk about contrast showers. And onions, and there's actually quite a bit of research with onions and infections. Onions have properties that are known to be antiviral, antifungal, antibacterial. The antibacterial activity has at least been studied against E. coli, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, Staph aureus, Bacillus cereus, Vibrio cholerae, the cause for cholera, H. pylori for like gastrointestinal issues, MRSA, your methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. And in fact, if you wanted to choose between a fresh onion and an old onion, which one would you choose? Well, the research says choose an old onion, right? An old onion. In fact, the antimicrobial, antibacterial activity of onions increases the longer that it's aging. And so if it's been on the shelf for about 3 months or so, it's even better. Right? It's even better. So onions and immune function, it also has immune modulating functions as well by decreasing your Th2 cytokines, interleukin 4, interleukin 5, and interleukin 13. It can decrease interleukin 6, 8, 10, 1 beta, tumor necrosis factor alpha, and IgE, for those of you that are interested. It increases CD4, interferon gamma levels, interferon gamma versus interleukin 4 ratio, your Th1 to Th2 balance, which has a lot to do with keeping your immune system from over-responding to stimuli, which is what one of the problems we had with COVID with the cytokine storm. And onions have been shown in respiratory problems to help with smooth muscle relaxation in the trachea so that your airway can open up a little bit. It reduces inflammation in the lungs. It has an anti-asthmatic effect as well for those who are struggling with asthma, and it has an anti-allergic effect as well. And if that wasn't enough, it also has anti-tumor effects too, but not as good as its cousin, garlic. Garlic is better from an anti-tumor standpoint. Now, all of that in regards to onions. I was recently the medical director and president at Uchee Pines Institute in Seal, Alabama, and we have a lifestyle center, residential lifestyle programs. They're treating individuals with natural remedies, water treatments, healthy lifestyle, helping individuals to get off of their drugs, reversing their diseases, and so on. And in fact, we did have COVID that came through several times through the campus, and we had a couple of hundred individuals that we were treating, from elderly to younger, from many comorbidities to those that had no comorbidities. And one of the things that we found to be actually quite helpful in the process of treating COVID, and especially in a situation where individuals have lung complications with a productive cough. So somebody is bringing up phlegm, they sound pretty wet on the inside, maybe have crackles if you listen to them with a stethoscope, but they're not at the point where they need to go to the hospital, or they're just not going anyways. An onion poultice is something that can be helpful. And it's something that's very simple. You just get an onion and you determine how much you're going to need in order to cover an individual's chest. This is a fairly good sized onion, and so I'm going to take essentially half of it, and then we're just going to cut it down into a little bit smaller pieces so that we can get it into the blender well. And it's basically simple onion in a blender. And what we're going to do is we're going to try to tease it into some juice. Okay. And it gets a little bit up on the edges, and so we're just going to add a little bit of water to make it beneficial and be able to stir up a little. We don't need it to be in a juice form. You just need it to be in a chunky form. And if you didn't have a blender, well, you could just cut it up into small slices and use it that way. And essentially what you're going to do is you're going to get some paper towel, which is about the size of what you want to use, and you're going to get some plastic wrap. Nothing fancy. Great value, so you can tell where I went shopping. And you're just going to basically lay out the plastic wrap. You're going to lay out your paper towel on top of it. And then we are going to take the onion and we are going to put it on the paper towel and spread it out a bit. And in order to get some surface area here, and I'll tease a little bit more of it out of there. And it is going to be wet, and so if you need to use more paper towel, that's fine. You don't want it to be soaking and dripping. And you basically get the paper towel and you're going to fold it over and then you're going to get tape and tape the edges. So I won't do all of them here, but you'll get the edge and you'll tape the edge and fold it over, right? So you're going to have it folded over so that you're containing all of the onion on the inside. You've got plastic on the top, and then what you're going to do is you are going to take that onion poultice and you're going to apply it with the paper towel side on the chest, bare chest, right? The plastic will be then facing out, and the plastic is going to look at holding in the moisture. And then, well, with some efforts, you can get the rest of the plastic wrap and the individual that you have on the chest, and you can wrap and wrap and wrap and wrap a few times so that you wrap that onion poultice up against the chest to keep it up against the chest. And then you can either tape it, leave it on the way that it is, put a tight t-shirt on underneath it, over top of it, and then leave it there overnight. Sleep with it on. If you have a spouse that doesn't like onions and they don't want to smell it, then excuse them from the bedroom for the night and use some air freshener the next morning, because you can't get away from the fact that it smells like onion. It really smells like onion. And, but it's really good at helping individuals with that wet cough and that pneumonia side of issues, and helping to, again, dilate the airway, help get more blood flow, airflow in there, oxygen exchange. Again, it's anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial properties that it has as well. It's only a piece of a whole program that you can use. Obviously, it's not just one thing, but we do have experience in taking individuals with some pretty significant cases of COVID that probably should have gone to the hospital, but they didn't want to go to the hospital, and helping to pull them through with natural remedies without a single medication. And it can be done. You just got to know what you're working with. And the big key, start soon. Start soon, right? That's the really big key, is start soon. Don't wait until, on down the road. What we try to do is anybody that, I say we, I'm not at Uchee Pines anymore, left the beginning of November, but that experience there of working with them, once somebody starts having their sickness symptoms, start that day with treatments. Right? Start that day, the very first day you start having symptoms. Start getting that scratchy throat, starting to have, that achy feeling or whatever it may be. That's that initiator. That's when you start. And what do you start with? Well, you don't necessarily start with an onion poultice. One thing that you can start with is a contrast shower. And a contrast shower is a medieval torture device that comes into your home, right? We like warm showers, and that's nice, but a contrast shower, you turn the heat up to what you can tolerate. If you might be feeble, have any dizziness, any other issues like that, it might be good to have a shower chair, somebody else that's kind of with you monitoring as well. But you want to get in the shower, and you've got about 3 minutes of hot, and if the shower head is here, then you're doing the rotisserie, round and round, and getting all nice and hot on all sides of the body. And then after 3 minutes, you turn it on cold, and you dance, and you do the dance for about 30 seconds. And when the 30 seconds are off, you turn it back to the hot, and you're like, oh, praise the Lord. And you keep doing the rotisserie under there for about 3 minutes, and then you turn it back to the cold, and you're like, and you do the cold for about, again, 30 seconds, and then you go back to the hot for another 3 minutes, and by the time you get to that third cold, you're kind of like, it's time for cold. And you're like, oh, okay, that's better, right? And if you go past 3 and you do 4, then you're really looking forward to the cold, and if you do 5, you're like, oh, bring it on, right? Because you're heating up the whole time, really, even with a cold. And so the contrast shower is something that can be quite beneficial. We know that with contrast, it increases your total white blood cell count, it increases lymphocytes, neutrophils, and basophils and their activity. And if you didn't want to do the full contrast shower, you can at least end the shower with cold. Again, there's research that shows 29% reduction in days lost to sickness by simply ending your shower in cold, 30 seconds of cold at the end of a shower. But the contrast works even better. And so when you start getting sick, start right away. Get on it that first day. And if you start developing lung symptoms, cough, and it's kind of a productive cough, onion poultice, and there's references for all of this as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor. Well, we can take a 5-minute break. If you'd like to rotate into another arena, you can do that. We have 4 more speakers coming up. They're not speaking about the same thing, although they have spoken first in the first group. We're going to have Jonathan Zirkle, attorney, speak about religious liberty, our most fragile right. Dr. Pam Salger is going to speak again on the ABCs of resilience and overcoming adversity. And then Dr. Dana will speak again on anxiety, the choice of memory. And Dr. Mark Sandoval will finish it out with nature's penicillin and antimicrobial herbs. Big mouthful there. Again, I want to remind you these are all being recorded. They're going to be on the website so you can see different ones, but stick around and we will start right away with attorney Jonathan Zirkle. Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Our first presenter today is Religious Liberty, Our Most Fragile Right by Jonathan Zirk. Please welcome Mr. Zirkle.
So this presentation is actually kind of picks up a little bit with my first presentation, but I realize you guys are all moving around, so I'm going to try to summarize a little bit about what was said before. Before, when I was talking about Roger Williams, and a lot of people don't know a lot about Roger Williams, but Roger Williams is really the man that's responsible for certainly religious liberty in this country, but it's really at the foundation of all of our liberties. Thomas Jefferson credited Roger Williams with being the original thought influencer on the First Amendment. And if you know much about the Constitution, the First Amendment is really at the heart of the Constitution. If there was one thing that I want more than anything else to remain in our Constitution, it's the First Amendment, because that's what gives us our most important personal rights. It's the right to free speech. It's the right to religious liberty. It's all there. There's a lot of stuff in the First Amendment. So just a little bit of background. Who's Roger Williams? Roger Williams was born in 1603. He was born at a time when there was no religious liberty, and he was born in England. He was a Puritan pastor. This was at a time when different members of the Protestant church were martyring each other. The high church was killing the Puritans, and they were killing the separatists. The Puritans eventually were killing the high churchmen. It's out of this that Roger Williams flees to America and comes to Massachusetts. And he's famous because when he was here, he had some things to say. He believed in separation of church and state. He believed that you should pay the Indians for the land and not just take it. He believed you shouldn't require people to take oaths that force people to take the Lord's name in vain if they don't believe in the Lord. Because of that, he got kicked out of Massachusetts. And from there, he went to Rhode Island. So he gets to Rhode Island, and he gets persecuted by Massachusetts because they won't let it go. Now, you have to understand, these are Puritans. And the Puritans, they didn't believe in religious liberty. Nobody in any of the colonies believed in religious liberty. What they believed in was the liberty for them to practice their religion the way they wanted to as a group. And so the Puritans in Massachusetts practiced Puritan Christianity and didn't tolerate any other kind. And you could find Lutherans that were doing the same in other places. That's just the way it was. So Williams comes, establishes Rhode Island. Rhode Island is just made up of a bunch of ragtag people. He attracted all kinds because he said, you can have religious liberty. Well, he got persecuted a bunch, and he finally went back, and he went to England, and he got himself a charter so that he was an actual, officially recognized colony. And when he did that, this is the way he sold his charter. He said to the Parliament and to the group that actually wrote the charter for him, it's complex how that happened. He said, look at us as an experiment. There is no other place in the world where there has ever been religious freedom, the kind that you and I recognize today. He said, let us try it in Rhode Island. If we fail, we'll know we shouldn't have done this. But if we succeed, well, you can see where that goes. He succeeded like you can't even begin to imagine, and it got us the United States of America, amen? And because of that, you got the guys like Thomas Jefferson and all of them doing things like writing the First Amendment. So what was it? What was Roger Williams' doctrine that he was teaching? Well, he had this doctrine called the Doctrine of Two Tables. And the idea behind the Doctrine of Two Tables is that the Ten Commandments, they're made up of two different tables. You have the first table, which is made up of the first four commandments, and this is man's duty to God. And then you have the second table, which is made up of the six commandments, that's man's duty to other man. And what Roger Williams said is that government should have nothing to do with legislating in the first four, but the government must legislate in the last six. And that became the foundation for his religious liberty. He didn't believe in anarchy. He didn't think we should have that. He believed in an ordered government. But he thought government should have nothing to do with the first four. So fast forward to COVID. What does this have to do with COVID? How can we apply it? Because like vaccine mandates, that's the big issue. How can we show that to be part of the first four? Well, you know, Christ, he was asked, what's the greatest commandment? And he gives the answer, love God. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, right? That's the answer. And that's like the first four, right? And then he says the second one's just like it. He says the second one's like it. That's love your fellow man. That's the second six. It still doesn't tell us, though, where the COVID mandates come into. So Christ was asked another question. He says, probably a lawyer comes up to him and says, hey, should we pay taxes to Caesar or not? And Christ says, well, show me a coin. And he asks him, what do you see on that coin? He says, you see the picture of Caesar. And Christ says, well, give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's. And my question to you is, who are you made in the image of? We are made in the image of God. And so you can look at us and we know where the duty goes. And so clearly our bodies are ours and they go to our duty to God. Scripture gives us so many powerful concepts about liberty. And Roger Williams got this. He understood it. He preached separation of church and state. He also taught the idea that the government derives its power from the consent of the governed. And where do you get that from? Well, if you go back to the Reformation, you can think about Luther, and he's saying things like the priesthood of all believers. Well, all of this, they're pulling this all out of Scripture. And I want to read a scripture that can give us some guidance in this. If you go to 1 Peter 2, verses 9 and 10, Peter says this. He says, but you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood. That's really interesting. What's a royalty? That's government, right? And priesthood. So we are a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people, that ye should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into this marvelous light, which in times past were not a people, but are now a people of God. So he's talking about Christians, because the Christians weren't from before, which have obtained, which had not have mercy, but now have. So you can see that as Christians, we're this royal priesthood. We have personal autonomy. Now think about this. If your body is the temple of God, and this is one that we quote all the time in our religious exemptions, right? Your body is the temple of God. Who takes care of the temple? The priest, right? But you're the royal priesthood. You take care of your temple. This is the text we use. Know ye not that you're the temple of God, and the Spirit of God dwelleth in you? If any man defile the temple of God, him shall God destroy, for the temple of God is holy, which temple ye are. He goes on to say this, let no man deceive himself. If any man among you seemeth to be wise in this world, let him become a fool, that he may be wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God, for it is written, he taketh the wise in their own craftiness. We live in a time where there are so many people that are saying they are so wise that they're going to tell you what to do with your body, tell you what to do with your temple. That is not what Scripture tells us to allow to happen. And it says that these men are going to be caught in their craftiness. Our religious liberty now is it's being held by a thread. And when you talk about the COVID vaccines and what's going on right now, it's really interesting to read the court cases. I read the court opinions, and there's a subtext. Some of the court opinions come right out and say it. Other ones, they imply it, or you can see that it's underlying what's there. And what they say is, they say, look, the vaccine mandates are not religious issues. And the court, how do they know? They say the reason why we know this is because there's not a single denomination on earth of any importance that will say it's a religious issue. And if the denominations won't say it, then it's not a religious issue. And this is a real problem. This is a real big problem. And what's interesting is if you look at the history of vaccines, the states in the past, most of them have recognized that for some people this is a religious issue, and at various times have said, you can have a religious exemption. And the EEOC has said flat out in their recommendations that this is a religious exemption, that this is a religious issue for some people, and that they should be given a religious exemption. But today, because the denominations are being silent, the courts are going the other direction. Why are the denominations doing this? I don't know. But what I do know, and some of these other presenters have been talking about, they've been talking about this idea of this mass formation psychosis. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that. I think that this is something that is going on. And I'm a student of history, and stuff didn't always go by these names when you study history, but I can tell you this. You listen to the theorists on this mass formation psychosis, and they'll tell you about Nazi Germany. But I don't know that much about Nazi Germany, but I have read a lot about the Soviet Union. And I can tell you that a lot of what I'm hearing about this is the same stuff that the Soviet Union was doing. And we're starting to see some of these things going. So what's the antidote to all of this? Well, freedom is truly the antidote, but it's hard to get the other people to see that. And so what I believe we have to do is we have to reach out to them. And this is where Scripture comes into play again. You know, Christ says to go and teach and preach and make disciples. And I believe that what we're seeing right now, I hate to see the polarization in America, the one camp here and the one camp there. We've got to go out and reach out to other people in friendship, and we have to educate them. Our religious liberties are so fragile. They're so fragile right now. And the thing that people don't understand, that I so wish I had the time to explain and go through all of them, you realize all of our religious, all of our liberty in America, which is really all the liberty in the world, because America's the guys, we started it. It's all coming out of religious conflict. It's all because of the likes of Roger Williams and Martin Luther and all the martyrs and Michael Sattler when he was martyred. And these are names that no one knows anymore. But the reason why we have freedom of speech was because guys like Martin Luther and the Protestants wanted to speak about religion. The reason why we have freedom of assembly was because they wanted to come together in churches. All of these things, they all come from religious liberty. And our brothers and sisters here in America don't know it. We need to reach out to them. So when I look at Roger Williams, he was a man, he said he told the English that you know, the Indians are made from the same blood that you are and that you're no better. That's how he made it through that winter. Roger Williams was a protector, not a persecutor. And he knew the difference between religion and non-religion. We need to have this in America today. And we need to take the time to learn this and share it with our brothers and sisters. And you need to know that you're not crazy for believing this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zirkle. It's beautiful. Our next presenter is Dr. Pam Solgren, speaking about the ABCs of resilience and overcoming adversity.
Okay. All right. So I want to talk a little bit about overcoming adversity, overcoming fear, situations that come our way that are difficult to sometimes face, and ways that we can positively overcome fear. And when I started doing research for this, I went directly to the scriptures first to see where maybe fear shows up in the Bible. And believe it or not, a lot of our Hall of Faithers, there's stories of them experiencing fear. I mean, you look at Esther, it talks about that she was afraid, yet she still did what it is God needed her to do. And she's just one of many accounts. But you know, it took me back to the very beginning, to the Genesis account, to when God created the heavens and the earth. And if you skip ahead to Genesis 3, it talks about, right, the story of Adam and Eve. And I'm just going to read a couple of the verses that I want to start with. If you start Genesis 3:8, and I'll go through a couple verses, it says, then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord as he was walking in the garden of the cool of the day, and they hid from the Lord among the trees of the garden. But the Lord called to the man, "Where are you?" You know, I want to pause there for a minute because I love this question that the most gracious, loving God asks. He asks a question that's obvious to him, asking where they are. He's seeking them out. See, they had already sinned. They had already separated themselves from God, and now they're hiding. But the Bible tells us something very interesting. It says, the Lord calls out to them, and they hear him, and they answer him, and they say to God, "I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid." I was afraid. It's what sent them into hiding. The interesting thing is, when we separate from God, we maybe are in fear. Like we talked about a few minutes ago, our emotions hijack us. We actually need to be turning towards God in a time like that. But instead, we often hide because our emotions get the best of us. And in this case, for Adam and Eve, their emotions got the best of them. They hid from the Lord because they were afraid. And I realized when I was reading that story that this was the first negative emotion that existed in the history of our earth, Adam and Eve. And it's interesting because when we are in fear, one of the first things we do is act in self-interest. Now, I'm going to ask a question. Anyone, the idea of what the opposite of fear is? The opposite of fear. And you know, there may be lots of adjectives running through your mind right now, but the interesting thing is, if fear makes us act in self-interest, the opposite of fear is actually love. It's love. Love is other-centered. God is love. The Bible tells us that. God is other-centered. And so when we're in fear, we tend to behave selfishly. We tend to be self-centered. When we're in love, we tend to act selflessly. We're other-centered in our behavior. And this idea of ways to overcome fear or fearful experiences that happen are some of the positive ways to overcome that are through intentional, godly living. And so I want to break a couple of these things down and introduce you to an acronym in the field of positive psychology, an area that I like to study and teach. But some of the ways that we overcome through intention is by having gratitude in our life for the things that God has given us. Another way is having, of course, prayer, acts of kindness, service to other people. But these are all intentional things that we have to mindfully overcome, building up our resilience to things that are happening so that when hardships come or trials come, we are more prepared because we have worked with God on building those character traits inside of us. And so I want to introduce you to an acronym called PERMA. And this was brought about by research from Martin Seligman. Dr. Seligman is a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, and he's the founder of what we now today call positive psychology, although the idea of it has been around for a long time. It's the science of happiness and well-being. And it really touches on so many aspects of the things that we should focus on. Things like exercise, the value of exercise, the value of fresh air, lots of water, healthy eating, spirituality, building our relationship with God. And so I want to break down the 5 just briefly in PERMA. And P for in the PERMA stands for positive godly emotion. All right, positive godly emotions. These are the things that we feel. This could be the joy or the gratitude, or the comfort or the warmth that we get when nothing else will bring us comfort, and we get on our knees and we pray to God, and He sends the Spirit, and we get that comfort that we need. The E would be for engagement. Now, this is an engagement for things for self-pleasure. This is things of other-centered. And so it's being fully absorbed in a stimulating activity like serving others, doing things for other people, getting out of ourself, because fear puts us into self, love gets us out of self. The R of PERMA stands for relationships. And this is relationships with others, relationships with God, and how we mindfully build these relationships on a day-to-day basis. Nurturing, positive, rewarding types of positive relationships. The M is meaning. And we need to find meaning and purpose in doing things for others, getting out of ourselves, doing things for other people, and finding ways to accomplish that. And when we focus on meaning in our lives, what we really find is that when significant challenges come our way, we have the ability to withstand that. And then the A in PERMA is accomplishment. And this is using your God-given strengths. See, each one of us has different spiritual gifts. Each one of us is given different strengths, but our strengths need to be practiced. Our strengths need to be, first we need to discover what they are, and then we need to practice those on a day-to-day basis until they get better and better and better. And then we use these things to further God's work. And I want to end with this idea, and it's called, in cognitive behavioral therapy, the ABCs are a form of therapy that is done on different patients and clients, but it's also used in the field of positive psychology. And I love the ABCs. They're so easy to remember. And I want to present just some ideas really briefly on these. The first, so ABC, the A stands for adversity. All right, so when adversity comes your way, it leads to the B, which is a belief that we have about the adversity. And that belief itself leads to the consequence or the outcome. We have the ability to control the outcome often through our belief system. See, if we have adversity hit us and we have an irrational belief about the adversity, the consequence is not going to end healthy. But if we have adversity come our way and we are prayerful, and we are prepared, and we have a rational belief about the adversity that comes, that then leads to a more positive outcome. And so I want to end with that idea of remembering the ABCs of adversity, or of psychology. Adversity is overcome by having a rational belief about that adversity. And then the outcome tends to be more positive. Thank you very much.
fun stuff, huh? Everything you want to know about the mind, but we're afraid to ask. Our second psychologist is Dr. Dana Philippsant, and she's going to be speaking about anxiety and the choice in memory. Please welcome Dr. Dana Philippsant.
So many wonderful presentations already. Let me get our slides ready here. So we know that the mind is a wonderful, wonderful thing that God has created for us to be able to recall, to process, to reason. We're told that every second, the mind creates chemical reactions in which we formulate thoughts, emotions, actions. Eventually, if we do them often enough, it should relate to having memory. And we also know in research that if our brains were to be working into its full capacity, it can be able to hold some 2.5 petabyte of information. Now, for some of you guys, you wonder, what is that, right? I'll break it down. It's 3 million hours of television watching. If it was working to its full capacity right now, in a sinful head that we have. In addition to that, that's like leaving the television running for more than 300 years continuously to be able to store the memory that we have. Now that's powerful. But did you know that research is also showing us right now that as anxiety level goes up, guess what goes down? Our memory goes down. Sadly, there is a very strong correlation between the level of anxiety and memory loss. And also research is showing that the relationship between the two is so inseparable that if it continues, it also is a good predictor of future cognitive distortion. In addition to that, it leads to depression. So you can see how depression and anxiety go so well together, right? A lot of people that have anxiety typically have depression as well. So this is what research is showing us. But the Bible tells us so many times, some 550 times, the word remember is there. Maybe it's because we are to recall so many things, and God wants us to recall, to remember what it is that He wants us to do, to live, to process. Let me give you some example. Isaiah 46, verse 9, the Bible says, "Remember the former things of old, for I am God and there is no other. I am God and there is none like me." That's one. There's another one that says, Exodus 20, verse 8. Some of you guys may know that one. "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy." There's another word there. How about in Psalm 77, verse 11? "I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your wonders of old." Here's another one. In Psalm 119, verse 55, "I will remember your name in the night, O Lord, and keep your law." So the word remember is important. We are to remember. Our minds is important to remember. Let me just kind of get you guys going in some activity here real quick. If I were to ask you guys, hopefully everyone here knows how many commandments there are, right? 10. Okay, good. You know, I have had some audience where, I had to tell them it's 10. How about if I were to ask you, which ones do you remember? Could you tell me all 10? Good. Do you know them in order? And so you start going down. Yeah. Now, if I were to tell you that you can remember the 10 commandments in less than 5 minutes, would you believe me? Praise the Lord, right? So let's try. I'm going to just get you guys involved really quickly. Using your fingers, the first commandment, one God. Second commandment, take 2 fingers, thou shalt not bow down to any idols. Good, so 2 fingers. 3 words, don't take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, using your words, right? Watch your words there. 4, picture this as a pillow and maybe the bed. Rest on the Sabbath day, right? So far, you guys already know 4 commandments right there, less than a minute. How about 5? High five your parents. Obey your parents, high five them if they're around. How about number 6, 6 fingers? Thou shalt not kill, right? How about 7? Taking 7 fingers, a mother and father, maybe they have 5 kids. Okay, do not commit adultery. How about that? Okay, I don't know, it works. How about number 8? Thou shalt not steal. That's number 8. Number 9, maybe back in the days, you had the Bible. They said, put your hand on the Bible and raise your right hand, right? Thou shalt not bear false witness. The Bible's under your hand there. False witness. And 10, thou shalt not covet. There you go. In less than 5 minutes, I can tell you, what is this? Thou shalt not kill, right? How about this? Thou shalt not commit. Everybody here in less than 5 minutes was able to use their mind to remember the 10 Commandments. Praise God for that. So with that said, you can tell that we have the capacity if we only know how to use it properly. And it's amazing because one of my field right now that I focus a lot on is trauma. A lot of people are dealing with trauma, so I'm counseling a lot of individuals, giving them the hope, having them to remember things, to learn how to process, to get out of the trauma that they face, either through childhood or even now, currently. And I'll ask them, how's their memory? They'll say, oh, it's very poor. But then I tell them, tell me about what the trauma that you experienced. They'll tell me the time, the event, the person, the place, even the smell. Interesting. Well, you know, science is actually showing us that anxiety interrupts, is very biased, I should say, in terms of our memory. In that there's a part of our mind, in terms of memory, that's called episodic memory. Episodic memory chooses what it wants to believe, especially if it's heightened by emotions. Anything related to emotions is heightened, but then it brings down other things, okay? So research is also showing that when anxiety is in place, our working memory can still formulate some things. Why? Because the same place that episodic memory takes place is the same place that working memory works its thing, okay? So keeping that in mind, I want you also to remember that there's so many types of memory. There's short-term memory, long-term memory, sensory memory, declarative memory, and so our brain is very, very powerful, right? And the ability to remember things is important. But if episodic memory has the ability to work at the same time that working memory does, that means we have a choice. Here's why. It happens in the frontal lobe. If you know anything about the frontal lobe, we can activate the frontal lobe through various activities that we do. So with that, we, you know, as psychologists and even educators, or even I might add, Adventists, we love acronyms, right? So here's one acronym that I hope that you remember. Choice. My friend and I put this together to help people to remember what is choice? Choice is C, choosing, H, health, O, over, I, internal, C, corrupt, emotions. If you can make the choice, if you can remember that, you can make any choice. You choose health over any internal corrupt emotions. When it comes to the frontal lobe, improving your memory, you have to make the choice. Bottom line. The wonderful thing about the frontal lobe is where the seat of reasoning and processing can take place. It tells you spirituality can also take place there. So if you can make the choice to have physical health in your life, mental health practices in your thinking. If you recall the first presentation that I did, we talked about all the aspects of mental health as it relates to depression and where we're leading towards a lot of times the heightened level of anxiety in America right now. But spiritual health is also important. And that's why it's remembering, we're told to remember. Use your memory to recall the things of old as well. Lastly, I know you guys don't have the slides, but hopefully you go back and take some of those information back with you and see the slides as we are talking right now. But I'm going to give you 6 steps to remember, how to make the choice to overcome anxiety. 1, as my colleague just mentioned, prayer is important. Matter of fact, prayer, we're told in various neurosciences are telling us that the frontal lobe is enhancing to the point where it decreases or helps with memory related, age-related shrinkage. So that's good. How about the mere fact that it also brings down lower places where our emotions are heightened, and especially the negative emotions. The limbic system lowers that negative part of our brain when we're praying as well. I once read this story. I don't know if it's a true story or not, but the point is this. She said, the person who wrote it says this: a woman was once asked, what do you gain from praying to God regularly? She replied, I earn absolutely nothing, but rather I lose everything. She quoted the things that she lost, things like, I lose my pride, I lose my arrogance, I lose my greed, I lose my urge, I lose my fear, I lose my anger, I lose my lust, and the list goes on. You get the picture. There's a lot of things that God wants to remove out of us by praying, and through prayer, science is showing that there is a lot of things that benefits us as well. Second step is identify the root cause of your fear, of your anxiety. As again, my colleagues mentioned about the fear is part of a belief system that we have. So what you do, you examine the belief systems through things like cognitive behavior therapy, which is the model that I use and prefer, alongside with prayer and Bible, right? But get down to the root cause of your fear. Very important. And you'll recognize that a lot of it is not called for, or it's not even rational. So the next part is study. Study. What are you studying? Study truth. There's the Word of God that's full of truth. Go to credible information for scientific research, and then observe. Observation is key. One of my famous thing and one wonderful thing to do is observe people. Find out how they really relate to one another just by observing them. Find out what the media is doing just by the reactions of people. And at the same time as well, take time to reflect on what you studied. So many times when there's so much information, we just take it and just go on to the next thing. Reflect on what you're studying, very important. And lastly, ask God to guide you through your study as well. The next step is to consider connect with health. Again, choosing health over internal corrupt emotions. That's your choice. But when you choose health, you're taking things like, take deep breath, stretch, exercise is very important, sleep, avoid alcohol and tobacco and use of various substances that shouldn't go in your body. Go out, enjoy nature, all of those things. Connect with friends, very important. Connect with the community or health-based community as well. And then volunteer your time and services. I so appreciate all the volunteers that we have here today. They're actually improving their health by helping others. Isn't that amazing and wonderful as well? A next step is promises. Develop, as you're developing your studies and so forth, there are things that are going to pop up to you. Write them down. Try to remember them. They're Bible texts that you can recall. Sing them, whatever you need to do, demonstrating your fingers and various things to help you to recall those things. These things will give you peace of mind. It'll give you peace of heart. It will actually improve your health. It will enlarge in your mind. And then you'll actually start developing a trust in God. And then remember this as well. The last point is make a decision. The Bible talks about how a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. Research is actually backing that up as well. It's saying that when we are very indecisive people, it actually causes to have anxiety, depression, procrastination, because we're so undecided. Make a stand and then stand for it. Make a stand and stand for it. And so that is the 6 steps that I would share with you. Just at the same time, while you're going through the same 6 steps, praise and gratitude goes very, very far. Keep those things in mind. I'm going to leave you with a quote. It says this: "We have nothing to fear for the future, except as we shall forget the way the Lord has led us and in his teaching in our past history." Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dana. Our last speaker is Dr. Mark Sandoval. He's going to speak about nature's penicillin I can't even say the word.
Antimicrobial.
Antimicrobial. There is Thank you, Dr. Sandoval. Let's please welcome.
All right. So we're going to be looking at nature's penicillin. And so nature's penicillin, some people know it as Russian penicillin. There's probably a number of different names, and there are different varieties of formulations. And so it's okay to approximate it. So we are going to look at a few different things. Simple stuff. We have been with onion before, so we're going to go with onion again because of its antimicrobial properties. We are going to be looking at oranges as well, and grapefruit, and lemon, and yummy, yummy garlic. That's right. So these are the main ingredients that we're going to be using with nature's penicillin. Why are we using these? Well, garlic, the major constituent is allicin, and allicin has antibacterial properties, both for gram-positive and for gram-negative bacteria, and for resistant strains, and it is antifungal as well. Onions, as if you were here last time, onions, quercetin is the major constituent, although there are 25 different of these flavoquinones that are there, and they do have antiviral, antifungal, antibacterial activity against multiple different strains. And vitamin C, which is a good component in our citrus fruits, has antiviral, antioxidant, and anti-inflammatory and immunomodulatory factors with it. And if you have peppermint oil, I didn't bring any with me, so I'm not going to show it, but it can be used also in this as well. And it has antioxidant, antimicrobial, antiviral, anti-inflammatory, and larvicidal properties as well. So if you don't want larvae floating around in your intestinal tract, well, peppermint's probably not going to be the only thing that will knock it out. You probably want something else as well. If that were the case and you were stuck in the jungle, I suggest you go for papaya seeds and papaya leaves. So if you're looking for antiparasitics in the jungle, papaya seed and papaya leaves. So blending it up and making a juice out of it. So what do we do for nature's penicillin? Well, you're going to take 1 grapefruit, and you are going to take 2 oranges, and you are going to take 1 lemon, and you are going to take half of an onion, and you are going to take 3 cloves of garlic, and about 3 drops of peppermint oil. And if you want to, you can add a zinger with some pineapple juice to add to it as well, so that it has a little bit more flavorfulness to it, and to hide the onion and so forth. So we're just going to take these. What you want to do is you want to take the color off of the skins of your citrus fruits. So you're going to peel them, not the usual way where you pull the whole thing off, but actually with a peeler. And you want to take the color part off, but you're going to leave most of the white pulp underneath, because that's going to be beneficial for you. The color's not bad for you, it just makes it taste worse. And then people are like, ew. And my kids are like, oh no, don't bring that out. And so we bring it out anyways, and they get to drink it. And so essentially what you're going to do is you're just going to take this and you're going to cut up your various constituents here, just so that they're small enough so that you can get them in the blender to blend. And again, we've got a lot of vitamin C that's going on here. Grapefruits are great as well, not just the grapefruit itself, but the grapefruit seeds are beneficial too. If any of you have used grapefruit seed extract as something to help out with your antimicrobial armamentarium, then you know that that is beneficial too. We're going to take some stinky onion and include that as well. And we are going to get to the garlic also. And it's fairly small, so we don't have to be very particular about how small we get the garlic. In fact, if you have a good blender, you don't have to cut it at all. You can just sit it in there. And, and then we get some good lemon. And it's really a lot nicer when my wife is doing this. But we don't have the tag team today. I'm usually the mouth, and she's the quiet demonstrator. And the children too. We have 6. All right, so you get all that cut up. And we're going to add some of the pineapple juice as well. That's my lack of hard fingernails. And we're going to include that so that it gets a little bit moist. And we can blend this up. And then we are just going to run it. Beautiful. All right. So I'm not going to run it right now as long as I would normally run it, but you're using seeds and all, right? Seeds are included and everything is included, and we're getting a nice mixture with that. All right. And if you don't have a Vitamix, get one. I do not work for the company. I don't get any benefits from them or anything like that. We just enjoy their products for the last number of years. And typically one will last about 7 to 10 years before you have to get a new one. So there you go, voila. It's nice and beautiful. And I didn't have the peppermint, the peppermint oil. So it's about 3 drops towards the end that you add that, mix it in as well. Some people like to add some stevia for the children. It's good stuff. It really is. So that's nature's penicillin. You basically drink about a cup of that throughout a day. Share it around with the rest of the family as well. Make the children take it so that they get used to it. And it's really not all that bad, except when you mess up and you put the skins, the colored part of the skins in there. Then it tastes kind of bad. But it has a good benefit there with you. There are some other things that are beneficial as well. And I was expecting for us to have a screen and for you to be able to see everything on the PowerPoint slides, so you'll have to look online for the slides here. But there is something else that is actually quite beneficial, and that is charcoal. Anybody here has used charcoal? All right, good. Not for cooking, not charcoal briquettes, but something you've used internally or topically. Charcoal is wonderful. If you're ever going to travel anywhere, take charcoal with you. International trips or anything else like that, just take the charcoal with you. My background is ER, and even in ER we use charcoal. If somebody overdoses, what's the first thing we do? Charcoal, right? Because it's a very powerful adsorbent. And basically it attracts positively or negatively charged molecules to itself and then holds them or binds them there, and you can't ingest it, well, you can ingest it, but you can't digest it, and you can't absorb it into your system, and so it gets drawn typically through the digestive tract, but if you have it topically, like on an infection, abscess, other things like that, it can be functional or beneficial from that standpoint too. It can be used as an antidiarrheal, sometimes in the other direction, which means that if you take too much of it, you could get a little bit blocked up. So drink a lot more water. If you are taking it, how much do you take? Typically about a heaping tablespoon in a cup of water. Mix it nice and up, and then chug it. Get it down fast. Some people don't like the gritty, the grittiness in your mouth. That's fine. You can swish out your mouth afterwards, and then you can go chase your kids around and go like that, and you got black all over around your teeth. Don't worry, it doesn't permanently stain when it's there in your mouth. Although it might if you put it on an open cut or an open wound. So you don't want to put it in open cuts or open wounds because sometimes it can tattoo that area. Unless you have a pretty looking wound and you want to keep it around, then you can put the charcoal in there and it'll stay the rest of your life. So it has been shown to help out with several different things. It's reduced cerebral malaria in mice, although you're not mice. It has been shown to reduce bacterial contamination in chronic wounds and a number of different functions. We have used it all over the place in our life and in our family. And when there's GI upset, somebody is nauseous or vomiting, when they have diarrhea, inflammatory bowel disease, Oh my, for inflammation anywhere, it's beneficial as well. You got pain in joints, you can make up some half charcoal, half flaxseed that's ground up and mix it up with some water, throw it on a paper towel, stick it on there, some plastic wrap, and leave it on for a few hours. It is quite beneficial from that standpoint. Now, I probably don't have time to go into all of the specifics of various different herbs that are beneficial, that have antimicrobial properties and things that you could look at using when you have a cold, a flu, a cove something that goes on. And one of those is African geranium. So African geranium has been shown to be antiviral and helps with respiratory infections, with colds, bronchitis, sinusitis, asthma attacks, and so on. Typically is best if it's taken within the first 48 hours of an infection. As with most things, the earlier you take it, usually the better it does. And there's not enough information to say whether it's safe to take in pregnancy or when somebody is breastfeeding. So in those cases, probably not. But otherwise, it seems to be fairly safe. You have American ginseng, also Siberian ginseng, and a few of the other ginseng. So if it's a ginseng, it tends to have antimicrobial properties to it, although there are potentially some problems if you take it long term, so it's not something that you want to run, months and months into the use of it. Typically somewhere around 3 grams daily, up to 10 grams daily, and it helps to reduce the incidence of colds and influenza. But you don't want to take it if you're on blood thinners. Right? Don't want to take it if you're on blood thinners because it can exacerbate the blood thinners. And it may cause your blood sugar levels to drop too much if you are on blood sugar medication. What does that mean? If you're diabetic, might be something good to take, right? Just watch out with the medication. And it has different active components to it. There is Indian echinacea andrographis, Indian echinacea. Again, started within 72 hours of a cold. It helps to improve the symptoms 2 times more so than placebo. And if taken as a preventative for 2 months, it can decrease the risk of developing a cold by 50%. Of course, you could decrease the risk of taking a cold by 50% by using a sauna 4 times a week or more, and compared to those that don't. And the Indian echinacea was shown to be better than amantadine, an antiviral, in treating influenza and other things. Another component that tends to be beneficial, and there's some research coming out with it with COVID, is black cumin and honey. Oh, honey, yes, there's good stuff for honey. So black cumin and honey, it helps to decrease SARS-CoV replication, and it's showing some anti-CoV-2 efficiency as well. And it may be more effective when it's combined together. So you could do the black cumin seed, and you could do the honey, but if you put the 2 of them together, then it might be even better. Now, how many of you have used echinacea? All right, that's a good one. Echinacea can be used in children, it can be used in pregnancy, it can be used in lactation, it can be used anytime. You can probably use too much of it, maybe. But it definitely has effects or benefits associated with it. If you're looking at preventing getting sick, if you had some kind of exposure, you're looking at about 800 milligrams 3 times a day. And if you're looking at treating it, then you just bump that up to about 5 times a day. And it has quite good benefits, and it performed as well as antiviral medication without the same price. Elderberry. Well, elderberry, if you want your kids to take anything that they'll actually take, it's elderberry, because it tastes good. It's like those, yeah, anyways, won't comment on that. So, yeah, they like sweet things. So they do really well with that. Elderberry can be used up to 600 milligrams a day. Garlic won't make you friends, but it'll make you healthier. And so it has anti-cancer, but it also has antiviral, antibacterial activity. In fact, it has the strongest anti-cancer potential of any single vegetable that's out there. That allium family does really good. Golden seal also has multiple bacterial activity, antibacterial activity against multiple strains of bacteria, antiviral activity as well. That is golden seal. But golden seal is not recommended in pregnancy. And let's see, propolis. Anybody know what propolis is? All right, so some of you do. It's kind of a bee product. In the process of making honey and making the honeycomb and all that kind of stuff, propolis is kind of it's a sort of quasi-processed component of bees taking pollen and turning it into honey. And taking propolis has been shown to be quite beneficial with viral and respiratory problems. Also, probiotics have been shown to be beneficial as well. And the general rule with probiotics is the higher the colony forming units and the more variety of bacteria in it, the better it is for you. But don't live on probiotics. They're there to be used in a short time frame, maybe over a couple of weeks to a month or so. But don't live on probiotics, because then they'll outcompete for the rest of your good bacteria in your gut. And one of the last ones we'll look at is cedar leaf oil. Cedar leaf oil, or thuja. It's also known as Thuja, thuja, or cedar leaf oil. Very high in vitamin C, and it helps to decrease this cold symptoms and helping individuals to feel better when used in combination. Now, some individuals develop COVID and they start having blood clotting problems. I'm going to step out on a limb. We have helped individuals with blood clotting problems from a natural standpoint by using a combination of several different things. Garlic, raw, it's got to be raw, or the oil, garlic oil, and you're looking at about 2 or so cloves 3 times a day, or capsules if you're looking at the oil. Welch's grape juice, stepping out on a limb, dangerous stuff here, about a cup 3 times a day is also beneficial. Ginger powder, about a 1/4 teaspoon 3 times a day as well. Evening primrose oil at 2,000 milligrams twice a day. And then there's nattokinase, which comes from soy. And nattokinase is about 200 milligrams a day. Now, there does need to be cautious with the combination, because you can get over anticoagulated and then start having bleeding complications or bleeding problems. We had one person that we were treating, and they started developing little purple spots on their body, petechia. And that means, whoops, stop, right? That's really what it means. And, stop doing that. And so we stopped for a couple of days and then started back with a few of the items not there and only doing part of it, and they did quite well. And so those are some things that you can use. Again, when you look online, you can see the slides that go along with this as well. If you want any more information, you can always email me at info@N as in Nancy, P as in Paul, MIN. We've got a ministry, New Paradigm Ministry, so it's npmin.org. So there, or the website. And if you want a lot of healthful COVID protocols that you can use with hydrotherapy, go to UCHePines.org. That's UCHEE, Pines, PINES.org. And there's a COVID-19 section that I helped to write and has protocols there for you. Thank you very much for being here. We are done with these sessions for right now. There is more stuff happening in the main section, but bathroom break, stretch, get up, do all of that kind of stuff as well, because exercise is healthy too. And then we'll be meeting back over in the main section for something else really soon, and you don't want to miss it, neither do I. Oh, yes, let's pray as you're walking away. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your blessings and for the simple things that you have provided, and help us to know how to cooperate with you in the process of health and healing, that we might be well as you desired for us to be. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
If you have any questions for any of us later on, you are welcome as you're here to pull us aside and ask us any questions, and we'll gladly answer them.
Yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Or come down and ask us. We'll be here.
Yeah. Probiotics. Yeah, what's the longest time to be on probiotics? I probably wouldn't go past 2 months. Yeah. What's that?
Where do you get all the herbs?
Where you get everything else at? Online. Yeah.
Or your health food store as
Rose
well.
Mountain Herbs is a really good source to get some, some of those. They have pretty good high quality stuff. Oregano oil, yes. Yes. Oregano is antimicrobial as well, antifungal. It's hot. So use a little bit and dilute it. And so yeah, you can do it straight under your tongue. You've probably been practicing that for a while. First time I tried to take it, I was like, whoa! And then the whole place stunk forever. But it works. Yes, oregano oil.
Thank you guys for being here.
Daily.
How often?
NPMin, so NP and MIN.
You said 2
.org.
months? Probiotics.
Max 2 months.
Max 2 months.
Yeah, I wouldn't just keep taking it. Woo. I think I got a piece of a seed right there. I didn't blend it long enough. Right. Don't just keep taking probiotics because they're healthy at one point, because they'll outcompete for your normal bacteria. Okay, uchepines.org, right? UCHEEPINES.org. There's a section on there called Counseling Sheets. On that section, there are over 500 different counseling sheets for all sorts of different issues with natural remedies that you can use in order to treat those. Huh?